call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for May 17th, 2021. Thank you for being here. And for the record, well, let's note that all of our city councilors are here with us tonight. So thank you very much, and invited guests and members of the public. We have three business items on our agenda tonight. Item number one is a strategic priority, homelessness. So we'll have a report on that. Item number two is pedestrians hindering the flow of traffic and pedestrian use of roadway center medians. And our third item is revisions to the city's floodplain regulations. So we will start our meeting, as we do most of our meetings, with public comment. And this is public comment on any item that is on the agenda. So either agenda items 1, 2, or 3. The public is invited to comment on those. To do so, you may unmute yourself or raise your hand in the Zoom format. It's down at the bottom of the screen in the participant icon. And if you'll raise your hand, we will call on you and bring you into the meeting. When we do, if you would please give us your first name and your last name, and if you'd spell your last name for the record, and give us your address, and then you will have 3 minutes to address the council. On any of those agenda items, number 1, 2, and 3, please make your comments relevant to those items. And our Mayor Pro Tem, Councilwoman Hoppy, will be our timekeeper for the event. So once again, if you'd like to speak now and citizens' right to speak, raise your hand, and we will call you into the meeting. And Mr. Goff, are you our
Marianne
is behind the scenes. So Marianne, do we have anyone with their hand raised?
No, Mr. Mayor, we have no hands raised.
Okay, I'll give it just another second or two. And if you're on the telephone, please unmute yourself and ask to be recognized, and we'll bring you into the meeting. So if you'd like to speak, this is your opportunity to. Okay, I don't see anyone with their hands raised, so we'll complete our citizens' right to speak and go to our first agenda item. This is our strategic priority for council this year. It is homelessness, and I will go to Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are happy to be here tonight to provide City Council with an update on your strategic priority, homelessness. It's one of, as you remember, it's one of your 8 priorities that came out of the retreat this February. And we are bringing those back to you over the next several months and providing you with a summary of what we believe we heard you say at the retreat, and then get some direction on from you if we heard you correctly, and direction also on ideas that we have for moving your priority forward over the next couple of years. So then tonight also we have Kelly Barker with Jefferson County is also here to give a little bit more detail about what the county's doing on homelessness. And she gave us a brief summary at the community meeting. Was that just last week, I guess, right? But tonight she'll have a little bit more time to go into a little bit more depth about some of the action items that Heading Home and Jefferson County are working on. But first, I will turn it over to Marianne, and she can introduce the rest of the staff that's going to speak this evening.
Sure. Really similar to what Mr. Goff just said, we are joined tonight by Kelly Barker, the Regional Homeless Coordinator for Jefferson County. She's going to be covering an overview of homelessness specifically in Wheat Ridge, talking about the Jefferson County Homelessness Action Plan, and then she's going to talk about the gaps analysis that Heading Home completed. And then following Kelly's discussion, we will have a presentation from our homeless navigator, Rebecca Rodabaugh, and she will go into more detail regarding homelessness as a strategic plan item. So we do have Kelly on the line, and I'm hoping she's ready to present.
I am, Marianne. Let me pull up my video or my slides. Okay, Marianne, it looks like it says screen sharing is disabled.
You should be able to do it now.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Great. Okay.
Good.
All right.
We can see that slide.
Great. Excellent. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you again, and thanks for having me back to talk about this really important issue and update you on some of the progress we've been able to make towards our countywide objectives for heading home. So tonight I'm just going to talk to you, as Mr. Goff mentioned, a little more in depth about these three primary topics. I'm just going to give you one slide on kind of an overview of Wheat Ridge data. Provided this last year, but in case there are folks that were not at that meeting, or just to give a refresher, just going to give a brief overview. And then talking about the homelessness action plan that Heading Home Group completed a couple of months ago, and then the resulting gaps analysis and recommendations that we've made from that action plan. So here's the kind of overview of data from Wheat Ridge. Now, this is taken from the comprehensive homeless summer count in August of 2019. The full report can be found on this on the Heading Home webpage with a link here. And I also have access to raw data, so I can provide a lot more data than what's here, but this just gives a brief overview. And then I have Wheat Ridge's data in one column, and then Jefferson County, just to compare at least the percentages. So you'll see the count counted homeless individuals and unstably housed individuals as well. So of those literally homeless, we're talking about folks that are living outside in a place not fit for human habitation, or in a shelter, which we have very few shelter facilities in Jeffco, so it's mostly unsheltered. And then unstably housed. So 62% were literally homeless, fit in that category. And then households, the number for Wheat Ridge was a total of 93 households. 58 of them were literally homeless, 35 unstably housed. I've bolded kind of these percentages that vary, I would say, somewhat significantly from Jefferson County as a whole, that just kind of might show a little bit how Wheat Ridge stands apart. But also just caveat all of these numbers to say, anytime we do a census count, a one-day census count, that we know that it's an undercount. So, and also this was done pre-COVID, so we don't know. This is our best data that we have available. Unfortunately, it's far from perfect, but it's the best that we know. And then total households, 66 total households, 11% of those were families with children, households with children. The vast majority are households without children, so single adults or adult-only households. 16 children under 18 were counted. Again, this is a month-long count, so over the course of that month, 16 were counted. And then 6 homeless veterans, 41% had a disability, 20% were chronically homeless. And chronically homeless are folks that have long histories of homelessness that also have a disability. So the folks that are most visibly homeless that you see out on the street corners often, under bridges, sleeping outside and things like that. So those are typically folks that are chronically homeless. And then folks that were found sleeping in a location, or reported sleeping in a location unsheltered, so meaning actually literally outside or in a place not fit for human habitation, and in a vehicle. So that was 61%. So quite a bit higher of people sleeping in their vehicles in Wheat Ridge, and also people with disabilities. So some things that the Heading Home Group has been working on, these are some just a few of those items. There's a lot going on in the county by other organizations as well, many of which are a part of Heading Home, but these are kind of more Heading Home driven or led initiatives. So Heading Home, for those not familiar, is the countywide stakeholder group that really has been meeting for over 10 years around developing a systemic response to homelessness in the county, trying to make it make homelessness rare, brief, and one time only. So these top 3 are solutions that are in place, and really mostly, for the most part, have gotten in place over the last year. So the top one, many of you are already familiar with, I spoke about on the last City Council study session about the Navigation Collaborative. So this is comprised of 7 municipalities, or sorry, 7 homeless navigators that are placed within the different municipalities and county. Now these individuals work together as a team, but are employed by their respective jurisdictions. So they can really respond flexibly to their respective jurisdiction. And that full team has been stood up again for, well, the Wheat Ridge Navigator, who is also shared among the cities of Golden and Edgewater, was actually the last navigator to come on board, and that was in December. So since December, we've had a full team of 7 navigators, most of which serve single or adult-only households predominantly, and then the county really focuses on homeless families. So we work really collaboratively together. So the non-congregate shelter for unhoused individuals that have COVID, have been diagnosed with COVID, we stood up a non-congregate shelter at a motel or a hotel in Wheat Ridge for 3 months last summer. And we learned a lot from that process. We were able to house, I think, around 80 individuals, and it worked really well. And we stood that down, but now we have an agreement with the city of Denver to use their activated respite for the same purpose. And that's pretty much winding down. We haven't had anybody with the need for that in a couple months, which is a good thing. And then one initiative that's winding up is the Built for Xero initiative, which, whoops, sorry about that, is the Built for Xero initiative, which is a regional initiative, and it's actually been very active in Denver for the past several years, but it just launched in this last year within each of the suburban counties. So Jefferson County formed a Built for Xero team. It's led by a group called Community Solutions, which is a nonprofit. It's a nationwide nonprofit that really works on a number of different things, but Built for Xero is really their primary project. And they've really got around 72 communities throughout the country to participate in this initiative. Like I said, Denver's been doing it for several years, but the goal really is to drive reductions in homelessness, kind of one subpopulation at a time. So we're starting with homeless veterans. Many communities start with this subpopulation because, frankly, they have the most housing resources available to them, mostly federal resources. So the idea is to really develop this data-driven, systematic approach, and then scale that approach up. Once you start to see the results, scaling that approach up to other subpopulations like families or chronically homeless, et cetera. So we're just getting kind of those different components in place and making some good progress. And we have a very collaborative team that works on that. So solutions being explored, so kind of in progress, haven't quite launched yet, but we hope to. There's a motel on the Colfax corridor, White Swan Motel, that has approached us at the county and also interested in working with the cities. Anyone who's interested, it's a new owner who wants to convert the motel into an upscale boutique motel in about 5 or so years. In the meantime, she's interested in master leasing some of those rooms or all of the rooms really at very discounted rates. It would amount to I think around like $40 a night to serve individuals experiencing homelessness. And so the cities and the county are kind of exploring what that might look like if we can pull together funding to use that almost as a bridge housing or temporary motel, specifically as a resource for the navigation team. Her agreement is that she'll fix up the hotel and renovate it to habitable and safe standards, and also place security, pay for security out front. So we're actively exploring that. We think it's a really good deal all around, and hopefully it'll work out. So that would be for the next couple of years. Beyond that, we are exploring actively a proposal that I'll get into and the next couple of slides and want to kind of lead up to the process and events that led to the development of these housing navigation centers, which we're proposing to stand up to in Jefferson County. And again, I'll go into that a little more detail here shortly. So the Heading Home Homelessness Action Plan, the Heading Home group drafted this a couple of months ago. It's a 3-year plan, and it really outlines these 4 primary objectives that the group will work on over the next 3 years. As you all know, we don't have a whole lot of services and interventions are focused on homelessness here in Jefferson County, at least not enough to meet the need. And so we really spent this time over the course of a couple of months trying to discern what will make the biggest impact. What are the key categories that we need to focus in on? So we landed on these 4, optimizing our housing crisis resolution system. And what we mean by that is really kind of think of it as the emergency department, emergency room of your housing crisis system. You need shelters, you need outreach, you need coordinated entry, you need diversion and prevention. You need all of those kind of crisis response interventions, to those temporary interventions for a system, a rehousing system to function well. And so that we stood up a work group around each of these 4 objectives. And so that's what that work group really works to find solutions in those areas. The second is increasing access to and supply of supportive housing. So supportive housing is really a very evidence-based, best practice housing model specifically for that chronically homeless population that I mentioned earlier. Usually around 20% of the total, 20 to 30% of the total homeless population in any given community. So this is just housing paired with services, and it's really geared to these individuals that really need services to maintain that housing. So we're really focused, that group is focused on increasing the access to and supply of that very limited housing stock, but very critical. And then the third is increasing data collection and sharing system-wide. So as I mentioned earlier, we're relying on this sort of census count data collection system. And so we're really trying to get more participation in what's called a Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, which is a metro-wide and truly statewide database on collecting information and characteristics on folks that are experiencing homelessness. So we're trying to increase coverage on that so that we can know at any given point in time what homelessness looks like in the county and the different cities, how it's changing, et cetera. And the last one is really increasing community involvement and supportive solutions. So we're trying to create opportunities for community residents to get involved in the solutions to homelessness, because we know only if we invest in more solutions can we drive down the numbers of homelessness and make sure all of our residents are housed and safe. So we want to create opportunities for people to get involved in a number of ways to that end. So gaps analysis, after this action plan, we were tasked by county and city leadership group to create a gaps analysis of sheltering options. So, what do we have? What do we know about the need? And then what can we deduce about the unmet need in Jefferson County to try and narrow down really what it is that we need in this county and be very precise and kind of data driven about that. So in this document, it's about 20 pages long. I believe it's within your packet. It's also posted on the Heading Home website. We provide sections on each of those topics. And then we also have a section just laying out what are the key components of a crisis resolution system, a sheltering system. What are the best practices out there around sheltering? What's most effective? And we kind of laid that out. And also, explain key terminology and really tried to make the document understandable to anyone who wants to read it, and provided a lot of context. And then from that, we kind of took those first 2 sections and created a list of priorities for Jefferson County. What is it that we need to focus on? Because again, we know we need so much, but we have to focus on a few things in order to get them done in the near future. And then lastly, we have a section specifically back to this that we provided a presentation to the city and county manager group on what we recommend we should stand up in Jefferson County. What should we fund in Jefferson County to start to meet these needs and really make an impact? So these are the 4 key unmet needs from that document. Sheltering options for adult-only households. We're very sparse in that in this county. We have a few interventions for families with children, most of which are high barrier programs, but we really have very, very little for adult-only households. It's most of what we have is severe weather based only. Low barrier sheltering options for people with severe health needs and medically fragile individuals. This is really an increasing need that we're seeing here in Jefferson County, that the navigators are seeing especially, but also throughout the Metro Denver area, we're seeing this. We don't exactly know kind of what's behind it, but we gave some examples in that document of kind of what kind of health needs we're talking about, and they're pretty severe. And then low barrier sheltering options for families with children. Like I mentioned, there are some programs for families, but most of them are very high barrier. So, you know, you maybe have to have a certain level of income, you have to have a certain household composition, you have to be free from drugs and alcohol, you have to make, you know, there's kind of no criminal background, there's lots of criteria. So the vast majority of families may not even qualify for that program. So that's a need. And then lastly, low barrier safe parking spots. That is in the comprehensive homeless count. We counted out of the 997 total individuals counted in Jefferson County, 200 of them, so 20% were identified and reported to be sleeping in their vehicle or RV overnight. So we really have a need to find safer places where people can park and get services and access services. And the Colorado Safe Parking Initiative has really stepped up into this space, and are, you know, continually over the last year they've launched, and I think they're on their 3rd or 4th safe parking lot in partnership with faith-based communities. So they're making great strides in this regard, but there's clearly a big need. Even before COVID, there's a big need. And so we have every reason to believe that that number's probably increased since then. So our recommendation, back to what I mentioned earlier, our recommendation that came from that gaps analysis in terms of sheltering and is really to stand up 2 housing navigation centers. So this is a fairly new model, although it's not brand new. It has been tested in the metro area and as well throughout the country. But the idea is really taking the best of various sheltering models and putting them together in one location. So the idea is to stand up 2 housing navigation centers, one in North Jefferson County, one in Central Jefferson County. The key components include that navigation center. So what we mean by that is really having a space that is a drop-in center, a resource center. It's open during the day. It's focused on housing related services and meeting basic needs. So anybody is able to access this program or this resource. It can be someone who's been homeless for 10, 20 years to somebody who's never been homeless and just needs a couple months rent to get their housing back stabilized, and everybody in between. So you can get shower there, you can use storage to make an appointment, to store your belongings, you can access a number of different co-located service providers like mental health, behavioral health, addiction services, etc. So it's kind of a one-stop shop that's open to anyone. And then additionally, in this center, we'd like to have shelter beds, bridge housing. We haven't identified the specific populations that would have access to these, but we're thinking folks that may have already identified or received a housing voucher. It's oftentimes there's a lag between the time you get the housing voucher and you actually move into housing. And so we don't want people to have to go out on the street. It's very difficult for case managers to find them, to kind of get all of their business items in order. And so that's one population that would probably really benefit from shelter beds, as well as the medically fragile population that I just mentioned. And then the last and third, and really I think is the most important component to have in any shelter model, is permanent permanent housing options, so affordable housing units. So our idea is to have in each of these units, I didn't mention, but we're thinking around 50 shelter beds, and then the affordable housing around 75 units in each location. So around 45 of those would be, or 40 of those would be workforce center, and around 35 would be permanent supportive housing. So workforce housing is just affordable housing for, generally speaking, 50% area median income households and below. And then permanent supportive housing is, again, that resource for chronically homeless individuals. So we added this because, again, sheltering itself without a housing solution is really just a way to manage homelessness. It doesn't really reduce homelessness. So it's really critical to have that permanent housing, that solution in place, and be increasing the stock of that resource locally. So our progress to date on that proposal, we've been meeting weekly with municipal and county staff to further this proposal. We've had technical assistance convened several times by the Division of Housing throughout the month of April. And then our total cost through that technical assistance, we really met to flesh out the proposal and develop the funding plan. And we've come up with, for both navigation centers, would be a total cost of around $60 million, with the gap being around $5.2 million for one time and 1.1 as an annual ongoing gap that we need to figure out funding for. But our tentative funding plan, again, this is all very tentative and preliminary, and we still need to get a lot of input from key stakeholders as this model is developing. But our tentative funding plan is to wrap this all under a 4% LIHTC, or low income housing tax credit application. And then the big reason why we're able to where we even started this proposal is that we received significant American Rescue Plan acts at the county and municipal levels. And so we can truly leverage, those dollars to help fill some of that gap and pay for this development. And then state and local housing vouchers would be critical as well as a number of other funding sources. So we're currently vetting this with the cities and county, and we have a municipal breakfast with key county level leadership and city leadership in early June, and we should get some feedback at that time. So really quick, I'm finished with the content of the presentation, but just wanted to show you some photos so you can kind of have a visual of what we're talking about here with the Housing Navigation Center. This is a really beautiful development, Arroyo Village, that is the Dolores Project is the nonprofit that developed this several years ago with a LIHTC application as well. It is on West 13th, so just south of Colfax. And it consists of 35 units of permanent supportive housing above a shelter, 24/7 shelter for women and transgender persons. And then adjacent to that is a 95-unit workforce housing development. So it's sort of like a one-stop shop. They do not have a navigation center on site though. So this shows kind of the courtyard. We just took these pictures after a meeting, so you can see folks don't congregate. It's not like what you may think of as a homeless shelter. It's not in some of the downtown Denver shelters, whatnot. It's a really well-managed facility and very successful. We just had a tour there on Friday. And the gathering place is a navigation center like model in Denver. It's been around for quite some time. They had this rebuild, this new project. I'm not sure exactly how long this has been around, a few years. But we also drove by this at a random time, and you could see there's not a whole lot of congregation out there either. And they have a number of co-located services inside to serve folks experiencing homelessness. And lastly, the Murphy Center, which is in Fort Collins, is a really successful program, also been around for, I want to say, around 15 years. And it is a navigation center model, one-stop shop. I think they do have overnight shelter during the winter months, I believe. But it's a beautiful program as well. So I will stop there. And here's my contact information. As always, anyone's welcome to reach out to me with any questions. I think I'll turn it back to Mary Ann.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to just turn it right over to Rebecca Rodaba, and then once Rebecca finishes, then we'll open it up for questions for everybody.
You're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to share my screen really quickly for my presentation. All right.
Perfect.
Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
My name is Rebecca Rodaba. I am the homeless navigator for not only Wheat Ridge, but I serve Golden and Edgewater. And tonight I'm here to kind of talk more about the Council's strategic priority of homelessness. So just a little bit more background. I'll be speaking on the priority during the City Council's strategic planning retreat on February 20th, 2021. Homelessness was identified as a priority issue for the next 2 years. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the work we currently have underway and then some new ideas for activities that staff has suggested on how we could proceed on this issue. So the work currently underway, I want to talk about the efforts of the homeless navigation program that we're currently have underway. Those being, so with the program that I am running, I conduct weekly outreach efforts, which consist of contacting individuals who are living unsheltered and offering resources such as basic needs items like socks, water, snacks, and to kind of build rapport with those individuals who are living unsheltered with the idea that they eventually work with me towards stable housing. I attend monthly municipal court, the idea being that I'm on site to provide resources to any individuals who have charges related to homelessness. I complete intakes for HMIS, the database Kelly had kind of mentioned, the homeless management information system. And when completing those intakes, I'm assessing clients' needs so I know what resources may be appropriate to them. I assist clients with obtaining vital documents such as social security card, birth certificate, and IDs. I'm always making referrals to healthcare, mental health, substance misuse, legal issues, any benefits, anything that an individual may be in need of. Additionally, I work with those clients after the intake to identify a pathway towards housing. And again, that looks different for everyone. And then clients who maybe have been matched with a voucher or are ready to start looking for housing, I assist those clients with housing searches, applications, and deposits. Right now, I'm maintaining an actively growing caseload. My current caseload consists of 26 clients, 8 in Golden, 17 in Wheat Ridge, and 1 in Edgewater. And of that number, 2 of the individuals have been matched with a housing voucher and are working to obtain the necessary documents to secure their housing. And as you can see, this number is different from the number that I had written in the staff report. Since I wrote the staff report, my numbers have gone up and I'm continuously adding more people to my caseload. So when considering the work currently being done and the homeless navigators caseload continuing to grow, these are some ideas from staff to help continue support the growing need within the community. And those being hiring a housing navigator and implementing a bridge housing program. So hiring a housing navigator would be able to assist clients in their search by keeping an updated list of unit openings, assisting clients with filling out waitlist applications. Additionally, they would be able to assist clients with filling out rental applications, interpreting leases, and understanding the tenant's rights and responsibilities. This would allow the homeless navigator more time to provide intensive case management for those who need a little bit more support and guidance when gathering their vital docs or accessing resources that are provided to them. An example of this job description from a recent City of Arvada posting has been included in the City Council packet for anyone who would like to reference that. And to help clarify the difference kind of between the homeless navigator's position and the housing navigator, the homeless navigator would do more of the front end work, such as completing intakes, helping clients gather their vital docs, make sure that they have all the resources. And once the client has been matched with housing and gotten their voucher, or they have income that would be able to sustain them in finding housing, they would kind of be handed off to the housing navigator to help find a unit for that voucher. As I stated, at this time, I'm currently have a growing caseload of 26 clients, and I'm able to manage this number of clients because only 2 of my clients have been matched with housing. But as more clients are being matched with housing or looking for housing in their search, it's going to be harder for me to manage that number. For example, I have a client that is moving on to the next steps of their housing voucher. And if this client does receive the voucher, they currently don't have access to phone or computer. So it's going to be more up to the housing navigator to kind of search for apartments and guide them through the whole process of apartment searching and then leasing up and everything that goes along with that. And that could be very time consuming and would take away from doing more intakes and providing those on the spot resources with other clients. The next idea that staff has for this priority is to implement a bridge housing program. To help to provide a little more background, in the shelter and gaps analysis that Kelly just spoke about, she did speak about how there is a need for a shelter, emergency shelter, or even a bridge program here in Jeffco. Until that navigation center with emergency shelter is established here in Jefferson County, my suggestion or my idea would be to have a bridge housing program that would benefit our Jefferson County residents, and we wouldn't have to continuously send them to Denver for some of those resources. So let's talk a little bit more about bridge housing. Bridge housing is a short-term housing that supports the housing first philosophy by providing safe, temporary housing while awaiting a permanent housing solution. Some of the benefits of bridge housing include getting people off the streets and out of shelters while they connect to permanent housing. Bridge housing provides a stable environment for people to acclimate to permanent housing, a place to store their belongings, and a place families can remain intact, which is not always possible in shelters, especially for families without children. They oftentimes get split up. The length of time to stay at a bridge housing program should be, it would be determined individually, but shouldn't exceed 90 days. And this program would work by the homeless navigator forming a partnership with a local motel or hotel to voucher individuals for an 8 to 12 week period, anticipating that only 1 to 2 individuals at a time may be vouchered with this program. To be eligible for this program, a client would need to meet certain requirements and will be evaluated on a week-by-week basis to make sure they're following through with those requirements and their individualized case plan. In 2020, Jefferson County supported, they actually used motels or hotels as kind of a bridge housing a little bit, and they supported 21 families ranging from size 2 to 11 people. Of those 21 families, 13 of them were able to get housed after staying at the motel. The average for that program is a little bit different. With the families, some were staying on average 2 weeks, some were staying 3 to 4 weeks, while some were a little bit different. With that, and I recognize that's a shorter period of the time frame of what I'm proposing. My hope is for people to stay shorter time frames, with the understanding that not everyone can move into housing as quickly as some others, depending on the different barriers that they're facing. And so this would have certain program requirements, one being for those individuals who may have already gotten employment and they're currently living unsheltered, to kind of bridge that gap, but so they can save up a little money, kind of acclimate, have their basic needs met, and then find stable housing. And so just to kind of wrap up in conclusion, the City Council identified homelessness as during their strategic planning meeting as a priority. And so these are just the 2 activities that staff is recommending for new ideas: hiring a homeless navigator and implementing a bridge housing program. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Mayor, I think we're ready for discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great reports, Kelly and Rebecca. We will open it up to questions from council. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Rebecca, so much. Quick question for you, Rebecca, with the housing navigator, would this be a position that's split the same way that the homeless navigator is with the other communities, or would it be specifically, is your recommendation specifically for Wheat Ridge? As I continue to serve, if I'm continuing to serve Wheat Ridge, Golden, and Edgewater, it would be a need that would be split between the three cities. And can I just, I'm sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add to that. I had lunch with the city manager of Edgewater today, and they said they're very interested in partnering on a housing navigator position.
Great.
Thank you. Additional questions? Ms. Hoppy and then Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Kelly and Rebecca for your presentations. And I had one quick thing. Well, I have some questions about those presentations, but also I thought that in the strategic planning that we had also identified mental health, and that the mental health and the homelessness were connected. But here I see that homelessness has been kind of carved out. So did I misremember that? Because I feel like in the conversations, I know I specifically was saying mental health is a hand-in-hand piece to dealing with homelessness, and that I felt like we needed to put a more direct budget line towards mental health services in our community, so that we could also then sister up with homelessness. So I'm just wondering if I misunderstood that. And I'll let you, I see you're looking for your notes, Patrick. So I'll let you look for that and then just ask the question that I have to Ms. Kelly. With some of the things in your report about some of your gaps, there were places like laundry services and safe parking places for like RVs and stuff like that. What are some direct things as a community that don't necessarily mean hiring another position? Not that I disagree with that, I agree with that. But what are some more direct things? Like, are there things where you had said that you guys were going to try to work on specific asks for the community to help? And so if somebody's watching this and they have, let's say they have a laundry room at their church, they feel like they could offer the laundry room at their church on specific days, or if someone's watching this and they have the financial means to, we have an RV park in Wheat Ridge, the Prospect RV Park, and they have a dump center there that anybody can go and use, but you have to pay for it. And so, if there is someone who's collecting funds for those, like how would that get managed through our community? Would that get managed through Rebecca? Would that get managed through Heading Home? How would we do that, make that direct impact in Wheat Ridge?
I think so we're actually with Heading Home, that fourth work group I mentioned, I just sent along an email today, we're developing out on our website different ways that people can get involved throughout the county. So, and we're kind of putting it in kind of like tiers, like different categories. So if you can donate tangible items, that's one category, right? And then we'll list all the different ways. And then donating money is certainly another very needed donation. And then volunteering your time is another. And we'll kind of list specific concrete ways to plug into that category, that kind of way to get involved. And then kind of different ways to speaking up in supportive solutions, and all the way to joining Heading Home and a work group. But I think locally, I'm probably not the best person to talk about locally how that would be organized. Our ideas with Heading Home is to do that on behalf of the whole county. So we'd include Wheat Ridge, and maybe even on the website have a way to sort by city, ways to plug in by city. That actually crossed my mind today. And like, if we can structure it in a way, I think that would be helpful. But then I imagine from a management level, I would partner with the navigator, whatnot, to manage that, something like that.
Great, thank you for that information.
Would you like me to speak to your question, Ms. Hoppy?
Please.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely brought up mental health during the discussion at the retreat. The three main categories that came out of the survey that City Council participated in to get your priorities listed. The first one was to develop solutions and work with partners to address homelessness. For example, work with homelessness navigators and other wraparound services. The second was to develop proactive affordable housing policies and programs. For example, evaluate the relationship between zoning and affordable housing, create affordable housing options, have housing authority invest in projects that bring new development. And the third was engage the community to support the city's efforts with hunger, homelessness, and human trafficking issues. And then during the day at the retreat, it was all compiled just into the title, homelessness and wraparound services, funding, et cetera. And that's what City Council ranked as an item. So there was a lot of discussion. And as I mentioned, Janice, you did mention mental health as a concern for you. It wasn't necessarily a consensus of council that was part of the final topic. That doesn't mean homelessness at some point shouldn't maybe address that, but I think we need further direction from council as a whole, if they would like to do around mental health issues.
Thank you for looking that up for me, Patrick. So then I guess my question for Rebecca is, if there is a bridge housing program, what wraparound services would we be offering in that time that they are staying with us besides finding housing? And where would we find those services to offer?
Great question. With the Bridge Housing Program, as I stated, it would allow individuals to kind of acclimate and get their basic needs met. So a place where they could store their belongings. And then if the individual has identified mental health as something they would like to work on, or they're willing to, then resources could be provided, a referral to Jefferson Center of Mental Health, and they could continue to work on their mental health while having a stable place to stay.
Thank you for that.
Along with any other resources they may be in need of.
And I'll just add that Jefferson Center has expanded their telehealth resources lately, and they've been piloting in multiple settings, having like a separate room set aside, or like bringing an iPad to people can access on-demand mental health services. So I imagine that conversation could take place, and we could figure out how to make that work.
Thank you.
Ms. Dozman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Rebecca, I had just wondered if you could walk us through how you connect with clients. If it's something that's like the police make contact first and then you kind of come in, or how you kind of form that clientele, and what it is that you do with these clients on a regular basis. And if there's anything else that you help them with other than, trying to find stable housing. I guess maybe just like walk us through a day in the life of Rebecca.
So that looks different in each city. In Wheat Ridge, I currently have a referral system set up with the police department and the courts. So if an individual comes to the court that wasn't scheduled for homeless court and they have tickets related to homelessness or identify as experiencing homelessness, then they will give them my card and make a referral to me. Additionally, the same thing with the police department. If they come into contact with an individual who's willing and wanting resources, then they'll fill out the referral form to me. That's not some of my referrals, some of them come through there. A lot of it has really just been doing outreach. I work pretty closely with the crime prevention team and go out with Officer Gross once a week, specifically I-70 Kipling area, anywhere where we're seeing people congregate, and just introducing myself and offering something like socks or water to kind of build that rapport. And then I get individuals reach out to me from there. Or if it's an individual, sometimes on the spot, I'm like, let's meet around this area, and we point out like a park or something that we can meet in, and then I can go meet with them and kind of meet them where they're at and take out that barrier of them trying to figure out what day is it, what time is it, am I going to be able to make my meeting today? And then additionally, word of mouth. Those clients that I'm serving have been telling their friends, and then they've been reaching out to me as well. And then sometimes I'll get referrals from the other navigators if someone is primarily staying in the 3 cities I serve. So once I meet with the individual, I'll do an intake for the HMIS system. And with that intake, it asks a lot of screening questions. And so after the intake is completed, I have a better idea. For example, one of the questions is, do you feel you have a mental health concern? If the individual says yes, and then that kind of sparks the conversation of, are you willing, do you want to get some resources for this? And what that looks like for that individual. From there, it's kind of, and I'm able to kind of ask questions as far as assessing their needs and what resources they're available to, or they would like. For example, if someone is like, it tells me that I don't have access to a shower, you know, I could refer them to the Rising Day Center, or I partnered with the Wheat Ridge Rec Center to be able to have clients access to showers there. And so any resource a client's in need of, I had a client who was in need of some legal advice. And so I was able to refer them to Colorado Legal Services, benefits as well, substance use, really anything that an individual is in need of, I can help them navigate where to go. And then from there, depending on the client's needs and the circumstances and resources available, I'll complete a VI SPDAT with a client and put them into coordinated entry or one home, which is within the HMIS management system.
Thank you. How many clients do you think you as an individual could handle at one time? And do you anticipate that number growing, or and I guess how many people can you kind of get through the system on a regular basis, would you say?
It's a great question. Right now, I currently have a caseload of 26, and it's getting closer to capacity. And as more individuals are getting matched with housing or searching for housing and navigating that with individuals can be really time consuming. So that's kind of where, if I'm getting more clients housed, I'm not going to have as much time to complete intakes and kind of identify pathways with other clients. So I don't want to put an exact number on it because there's just so many different circumstances, but I am getting close right now to being at capacity. And it just depends on the client's needs too. Some clients who really struggle and they need a little more guidance and assistance with certain things, and that can be really time consuming. For example, individuals who don't have phones or access to a computer, or have trouble navigating a computer. One of the things I do is sit with that individual, call Social Security, which I could be on hold for a while with them, and then helping them navigate the conversation and how to get what they need from Social Security. So it's smaller things like that where some individuals or families are really quick and they are able to do it by themselves, and then others who need just a little bit more support in doing that.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Thanks. I think this is, I'll let Rebecca or Kelly decide who's the best person to answer. I wanted to know more about, so I understand how we're working to, really solve this issue for the long term, hopefully. But what are we doing, and what can residents in Wheat Ridge do to help people right now? We have a lot of people in our community that want to help. Also, if there's severe weather and it's an emergency situation, where do people go in the real time? I know we're talking a lot about the planning and what we want to do, but just want to know more about what's available. Even myself as just a resident of Wheat Ridge, I sometimes wonder where I can call if I'm talking to someone who's in need of housing. That's a really big question, so there you go.
Do you want me to take that, Rebecca, or start? Okay, and then you can fill in. So back to the earlier, the prioritization, I recognize it's a really kind of big need, that there's a lot of residents that want to do something to help now. And I've received a lot of those calls. And so that's part of the reason why we created that fourth priority for Heading Home group, and engaging the community in supportive solutions. And so one of those we're working, that group is, we call it the Yambi Group for short, the opposite of NIMBY, but it's basically trying to rally and provide opportunities for people to get involved in the solutions. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we're creating that website probably in the next month or so, of all the different ways to get involved, so that people can go and just, depending on if they want, everything from donating time, money, tangible items, all the way to, if you want an actual like buddy, there's a program we're launching, Jefferson County, called Miracle Messages, that is, people can sign up to be a buddy to someone experiencing homelessness, and really kind of a mentor relationship, all the way to being on a work group. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, and I know there's a lot of people that want to get involved in the solution. So I'm really excited to launch that for that very reason. But I mean, in terms of today, we don't have anything, I don't have anything set up right now, but I know that one way that people can help is donate to the Wheat Ridge Community Foundation supportive Rebecca's clients in housing navigation program. So, and she can maybe speak to that, and anything else that folks could do today in Wheat Ridge to help.
That's awesome. Kelly, real quick before, because Rebecca, I want you to talk about the community foundation too. But Kelly, when this program launches, it sounds like in a month, is there going to be some communication with all of the councils and comms and everybody, so that we know how to get this information to residents?
Yeah.
Is there kind of a marketing plan for it, I guess, so that people know how to connect to it?
Yeah, no, we haven't gone that far yet, but I mean, our general marketing for everything is through a Heading Home listserv, which has almost, I believe, all the jurisdictions are represented on that. And so they'll get that. But I also work on these collaborative teams with all the cities. So I'll definitely promote it to all the cities. And then I think you guys, each city looks differently, how it will be rolled out. But I'll definitely make sure all the cities know about it. Marianne is part of a lot of those emails. So, so you can decide the best place to advertise that and promote that with your residents.
And to kind of build off what Kelly was talking about, we do have the severe weather emergency shelter system, which is October through April, and individuals, they would sign up through this and be sheltered during inclement weather. Additionally, if there is a member of the community who sees a person experiencing homelessness specifically within inclement weather, or even if it's not inclement weather and want to know kind of what the next steps are, you could always contact the non-emergency line, and they can make sure that it's routed to the correct person, whether it's a referral to me or an officer going out and following up with that person in the moment.
Ms. Hoppy.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question on the severe weather. So I actually had an incident where during the blizzard, I found a young lady walking down the street in not enough clothing for a blizzard and soaking wet shoes. And me as a person who has a phone with internet and probably more information than the average person, what I found is I couldn't find any information on the website for like the city, or I was Googling like severe weather shelters in or around the city of Wheat Ridge, and nothing was coming up. And so I guess I would say is that there's a very large gap. If someone, I already know, I was already trying to search the right words on the city website and couldn't find that information. Calling the police was not something that came to my mind, because that's not, to me, a police issue. So that's I would just say that there probably needs to be a better link. We ended up my husband and I ended up putting her up in a hotel for the night, and paying for that directly because we couldn't find any other resources for her. So I guess I would say there needs to be a better system of letting people know what is available. And I also found out that later that night we were out of our hotel vouchers anyways. And so even if I were able to find a police officer, they didn't have any more vouchers for that night. So working with like our faith-based community and maybe trying to get some more severe weather or something like that, severe weather temporary shelters, I think would be very important, but also having that information much easier to find.
Thank you.
Couple things real quick. All the severe weather housing options are listed on the Heading Home Get Help page. So we probably should link that to the Wheat Ridge page, perhaps. That would be a good, easy solution. And then the other thing is the county has a partnership with all of the police departments within all the municipalities, and the county pays for that, actually, that resource, and there's no limit. So if there is somebody that you can find, and again, should say no limit, but it basically, we allow discretion for police officers as they encounter someone in inclement weather to voucher someone at a couple of designated motels or hotels throughout the county. So they have that license to do that, and then the county picks up the tab. So that's kind of our backup plan for, this is for people that PD encounter like midnight or 10, and they miss the severe weather shelter network's limit and they're maxed out. And so, but it's not the best thing, but it's kind of worked. And then we work with Denver to just basically anyone beyond that, we'll try and help them get situated in a Denver shelter as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Olteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to recognize just the amount of work that's getting done with, I know, is fairly threadbare resources. So I'm incredibly impressed with Kelly and Rebecca, what you've been presenting tonight. And I just wanted to thank Rebecca. I had encountered a gentleman as one of those storms was coming in, and Rebecca was incredibly responsive. And I just want to thank you, Rebecca, for taking that call and stepping up. I'm excited about the possibility of expanding our city capacity to connect people with stable housing through regional partnerships. And I would definitely support that moving forward, especially, if we're able to do this in the same way that we've been able to bring on the homeless navigation program. I'm sort of curious, there were a couple of other things in the presentation that kind of point a little bit more towards policy or other resources. In particular, I'm curious where the city is in its policies about providing parking options. I know that was in the presentation material, and we have a lot of parking in the city. So I'm really curious if that's something that the city is looking at from a policy standpoint, or if that's something we're working in partnerships with, say, churches to be able to provide some parking options for the people who are housed in their cars.
Well, Ms. Olteen, you are the city. So we haven't had those discussions yet with, so if that's something, that's the kind of feedback we're looking for this evening. If that's something you want us to bring back for a policy discussion with City Council, we'd be happy to do that. So, but yes, we don't currently, and I don't know, is Ken still on, John Stone? I don't think our code specifically speaks to it today, and I don't know what the answer would be. If we went to Mr. Johnstone and said, can somebody put up a parking lot for safe parking? And I would let Ken answer that.
Yeah, fair question. I think, the quick answer is it's, there's probably some sort of a code violation associated with that. But I would imagine that's either an easy, either policy, administrative policy fix, or a code amendment if need be, if that's the direction that we receive from council.
Well, I'd be interested in proposing that's something we bring back. Is that something that I would have a second supporting that?
Consensus to
Yes.
explore that option.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or we probably, I know that staff is looking for consensus on moving forward on some of these initiatives. Ms. Hoppy?
I do have a question. Oh, Judy, you can ask your question first.
Miss Hutchinson, thank you.
Thank you. I do have a question. When individuals are given information regarding resources, how do they get to the places where the resources are? So if you find somebody on 38th Avenue walking around and they get a voucher to a hotel, do they walk over to I-70 and Kipling, or, how do they get in there? And also when they do have appointments for, like maybe they're connected with mental health, do they keep the appointments? And then how do they go there? And when you're talking mental health, are you also talking drug abuse, alcoholism? Because many people will say, no, I don't have a mental health problem, all right? And, they're an alcoholic or whatever. So how successful is that for follow-up?
To distinguish, when I do my intake with clients, those are two different questions. So one is, do you feel you have a mental health concern? And the other is, do you feel you have a substance abuse issue? And so then it puts it on the client to determine if they feel it is an issue. And then if so, it depends on the client and the circumstances. If clients living unsheltered, it may be harder for them to make those appointments. And I can provide clients that I work with, and I know that they have an appointment coming up, as part of my funding, I can provide bus passes for them to get there. And then I believe Severe Weather Sheltering does that as well. They get a bus ticket to get to their hotel or motel, and then a bus ticket to get back to where they were staying. And I don't think we have any numbers on who follows through with appointments. It's really individually based and kind of their circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy. Or Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So when we looked at the Dolores project in Arroyo Village, that was a great partnership between Rocky Mountain Communities, which I'm a board member of, and the Dolores project. And what they were able to do is replace a homeless shelter, but they were one of the first homeless shelters to be developed in the past 20 years or so. And so when we talk about a homeless shelter here in Jeffco, it's great sort of in the sky. When we put it on the ground, I think that's where we get into somewhat of the weeds. And I'm less enthusiastic about sort of a traditional shelter experience, as opposed to trying to focus more on the network that we have, the cold weather care experience, the ability to work with the churches. I'm having a hard time finding where would we be placing this. My understanding is there's some sort of qualified census tracts that you're looking at. So are there particular locations that we're looking at for this, or have we identified those qualified census tracts?
Kelly, do you have or Patrick, do you have some information on that?
Probably
And
Kelly.
are you referring to the housing navigation proposal, or to the respite bridge, the motel option that Rebecca was speaking about?
Can you say those two again?
Sorry, the navigation center, like the big proposal I was talking about, the one in North Jeffco and Central Jeffco, or the bridge housing, the motel?
Not necessarily. The bridge housing thing somewhat makes sense. I do have some concerns about whether the motels should benefit from something like that, because they need to get their stuff together. But I was more concerned about the navigation center, the 50-bed shelter description that was presented.
Okay, so your question was, do we have any QCTs identified for that specifically?
Correct.
No, we're just really, we haven't gotten that far yet. We do have some sites potential sites. We're really in the process actually this week of compiling all those sites into one place. So City of Lakewood, Arvada are primarily identifying sites in the county because to my understanding, there's no QCTs in Wheat Ridge. And so we're just now starting to compile those, but we really need to get conceptual buy-in and go ahead before we really start to meet around honing down on those sites. So the shelter, also the bridge housing component, would just be one component of the larger plan as well. And we really want to have it be more of like a bridge housing model for people that kind of already have maybe a voucher identified or and just need that, you know, component, that the bridge housing between being unsheltered and being housed. But we don't have
well,
sites.
and I think that aspect of it does make sense. One of my overarching concerns is that this is an ebb and flow type crisis where we will see situations down the road where our homeless crisis isn't as great as it is now. I don't think that diminishes what we have to deal with right now, but I would prefer it be that bridge model as opposed to us developing a long-term shelter within the county. I just find it hard that we'd be able to find a location for that.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I ask for my consensus, I do just want to say that I fully support navigation centers, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to find something that we'll be able to refer our community to. However, for the purpose of this consensus, staff has asked us to give direction on hiring a housing navigator and implementing a bridge housing program. And so I'm going to go ahead and separate those two and ask for consensus for hiring a housing navigator in the proposed timeline of 2022.
Okay, hands, all those in favor of that? Looks like we have consensus to move forward with that recommendation.
And then I'll ask for consensus to implement a bridge housing program in the proposed timeline of 2022.
Bridge housing program. Looks like we have consensus to move forward with that recommendation also. Thank you. Those were the two recommendations that were identified in the report. Mr. Goff, do you think we have additional discussion that we need on this item?
Not tonight. I mean, this is going to be a continual discussion. I'm sure we'll be back in front of you. As Kelly mentioned, some of these items that we spoke about this evening are just getting started, and like even the motel on Colfax, we still have some more discussions to go on that. So we'll be back in front of you with more ask, I'm assuming, in the future.
Terrific. Well, Rebecca and Kelly and Mary Ann, thank you very much for bringing this information forward. We had a good discussion last week, and this is more, more information and bricks to form a good foundation for a strong program throughout the county. So we appreciate your work. Thanks for bringing this forward, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Okay, we will go now to agenda item number 2. This is the pedestrians hindering the flow of traffic and pedestrian use of the roadway center medians. And I'll go to Mr. Goff for a staff report.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll introduce this. We also have Chief Murtha here, and our City Attorney Jerry Dahl will help with the discussion. But as a little bit of history on this, we brought this to City Council back in October of last year in a study session to discuss it, and we did receive consensus at that time to bring forward an ordinance, which we did. And at the public hearing on January 25th, there was direction from City Council at that time to cancel the public hearing and to bring this back to study session to have a further more detailed discussion. So we're here in front of you this evening to have that discussion. In your packet that you received for tonight's meeting are the 2 draft ordinances that you saw last year, and the 1st of January. We haven't made any changes to those, but we're looking for directions tonight. If you would like to bring those forward again or make amendments to bring them forward. You know, these ordinances are really a new tool for our police department to manage and enforce unsafe activities, behaviors that we've been seeing in the city. And we have a feeling and a concern that it's going to get worse this summer. We're already starting to see more and more pedestrians on medians and in very unsafe areas, and then also hindering the flow of traffic by either stepping into traffic or walking along a roadway. So I believe the chief has some statistics on the safety issues that we've seen specifically in Wheat Ridge and across the country. So maybe I'll turn it over to him and let him speak about that first.
Chief Murtha.
Thank you, Patrick, Mr. Mayor and Council. I don't want to bore you to death tonight with statistics, but I think a few that are very relevant revolving around the safety issue that we're discussing tonight. As far as pedestrian fatalities go, as I was sort of doing some research for this, there's interesting facts about the speed of the vehicle and the risk for severe injury or death, and I think those are issues that certainly concern us. As we look across the exercise and we see folks in the roadway or folks in the median, I think what we're talking about here is prevention. As we look back at Wheat Ridge statistics, we've seen an uptick in our pedestrian collisions, but not great enough to say that in and of itself would be the primary reason. But intuitively, I think we all know as we drive through these intersections that individuals are exposing themselves to greater danger by being in such proximity to vehicles. Nationally, we've seen since 2015 a rise in pedestrian fatalities. In 1980, that was the all-time high in pedestrian fatalities in the United States. That number decreased over the years until 2015. From 2015 to now, we've seen a rise in pedestrian fatalities. I think a lot of that has to do with the distracted driving. A lot of it has to do with just the general attitude of people on the road right now. But that being said, it is a national trend upward. So we've seen that continue. Looking at some of the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration's data, they input age, time of day, light speed, all those things that we can look at and see that there is certainly statistical data to tell us when, why, and how things might happen. But I think what's really important here in Wheat Ridge is that as a preventative measure, what we see is that the amount of exposure is really one of the key elements. So the more a person is exposed to a highway, and I'll use the off ramps for I-70 at Kipling. The more a person is exposed, the more likely they are to be seriously injured or to die. I referenced earlier the speeds at which the AAA studied vehicle collisions to find out what speeds most people are injured or die. So for serious bodily injury, at 16 miles an hour, 10% of the people who are struck by a vehicle suffer severe bodily injury. At 23 miles an hour, 25% of those people struck suffer severe bodily injury. And at 31 miles an hour, 50%, half the people who are hit suffer severe bodily injury. Continues to go up from there. When you look at speeds for death, 10% of the people who are hit at 23 miles an hour die. 25% of the people who are hit at 32 miles an hour die. 50% of the people who are hit at 42 miles an hour die. Those are the speeds that we informally surveyed and found were constantly meeting. We were constantly seeing on the off ramps at I-70 and Kipling. We're constantly seeing it on Wadsworth. We're constantly seeing it on Kipling itself in the areas where we tend to see people in the roadways or in and around the roadways. So National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration verifies that information and says between 35 and 45 miles an hour is the greatest number by far of people who are dying from vehicular collisions as pedestrians. And what that just simply suggests is obviously nobody's walking on I-70. They are feeling comfortable around vehicles that are doing 35 to 45 miles an hour, yet those are killer speeds. Those speeds are killing people in numbers. So as I drive around the city, I think in the packet, you probably saw some of the photographs of people that we probably have all seen next to the roadways with children, infants, with animals and pets. We're seeing that more and more. We're seeing folks starting to enter the center medians on Wadsworth on nice days. Part of that is because the neighbors to our north, or I'm sorry, our Vada neighbors are really preventing that type of activity, and those individuals are tending to find our intersections much more friendly to use. So we can talk about statistics all day long, but I think I think those are mostly intuitive. We talk about the use of raised medians for pedestrian use, whatever that might be. Denver did a study over I think a 3-year period. They used the main roadways, Federal being one of them, Colorado Boulevard being one, I forget the third. And they found that 8 of the 24 fatalities on those 3 major roadways, which were pedestrian fatalities, were on raised medians. That was not a refuge area. It was never designed to be a refuge area. Those are areas that tend to be almost as dangerous as if you're walking across the street or on a flat surface. So those are some of the facts that are out there right now. And I've got a ton of other facts, but the bottom line is people who are in the roadway, people who are right next to the roadway, their exposure time is so they are certainly at the highest risk. And some of those are population, our community that are really incapable of understanding exactly what that risk is when they put themselves there. So if you have questions about the statistics, I think I can probably answer a lot of those. I will say from a police perspective, I'm often charged with trying to anticipate, trying to understand, trying to prevent future problems, future death, future injury. And this is one that seems to me to be very easy to understand, to present to the council and say, look, I believe that this could potentially prevent injury down the road and death and trauma. So that being said, I yield my time back, if I have any left, to Mr. Dahl and Mr. Goff, but I am happy to answer any questions from the police perspective. Again, 5 fatal pedestrian collisions last year. That was our high. We're usually around 2.5 per year. I'm not sure if that's indicative of a trend. It certainly is not enough data to support that, but it's trending the wrong way nationally as well.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
Mr. Goff, anything more that you wanted to add on that before we go to questions? Or
I think just the fact that we're looking for a direction tonight, if council would like to bring this back as is or with some amendments. Chris Randall, our municipal judge, is also on the line to answer any questions that you may have. I know there were some concerns from, I think, our last discussion on this on adding more obstacles to individuals experiencing homelessness, which I agree with. And what happens if this is a law? What happens with citations that they receive, and how do those go through the court system? And the judge some thoughts and ideas about that if you'd like to ask him those questions. But otherwise, we'll turn it over to council, Mayor.
okay, Judge, did you have any remarks you wanted to add before we go to questions?
Thanks, Mayor. Nah, nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay, we'll put you on the receiving end then, Ms. Hoppy, and then Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to step back just for a minute. And first I want to say, I understand that this is a safety issue and people being in the medians are a safety issue, but the way that it came to council wasn't because we were concerned about people being in the medians as a safety issue. It was because there were concerns about the number of homelessness we had in our community and what things could we do to make our community less welcoming. And so then it was, well, take a look at what the communities around us are doing. And one of the things that we found that the communities around us were doing was the pedestrian in the right of way. Our surrounding communities, the way that they have it written, as I remember it being said, is that we're really pushing the line with what the way they had written it. And I know that it took our city attorney a while to be able to find more of a bright line rather than a gray line, putting these together. And then it went to a first reading and a second reading. Here is my issue. In the ordinance as it reads, and I will not support this going on as it is, in the ordinance as it reads, it says in section 1BG, penalty, any violation of this section shall, the word shall, be punished by a fine or imprisonment not to exceed the limits in section 1 through 5 of this code. If we can fix this so that somehow we are not putting hurdles in front of people who are already on a very bumpy road and working very hard to get out of this place and get to self-sustainability, if we can fix it without doing that, then I will support it. But as it is now, I cannot support it the way it is.
Thank you. I don't hear any discussion on that, so I'll go to Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of concerns. I understand, the safety concerns. The last couple of days, there's been a guy with his dog at the 44th and Wadsworth intersection that has just caused me great anxiety every time I drive by it. But I think my question is probably for Mr. Dahl. I'm looking at the shorter proposed ordinance, Council Bill number 28, as it's titled. And on the second page of that, in what appears to be section 1, paragraph C, and it says unlawful act, it shall be unlawful for any person to willfully and unnecessarily hinder, obstruct, or delay traffic, or willfully and unnecessarily attempt to hinder, obstruct, or delay any other person who's lawfully driving or traveling along or upon any roadway so as to interfere with the effective movement of traffic. When I read that, the first thing that comes to mind is walking my own neighborhood where there are no sidewalks. And so when I walk, I am forced to walk in the roadway, especially in the parts where there's ditches. I either have to walk in the roadway or I have to trespass on my neighbor's yard. And most of them are not huge fans of that. So I'm just curious how that would be interpreted by just a pedestrian in a neighborhood who didn't have a sidewalk option.
Fair enough. I think we can recognize that this particular language is probably necessarily subjective, and you're right. It could be read to apply to the very fact pattern you described. You're willfully, meaning you've decided to be in the road. Is it unnecessary for you to be in the road? Maybe not. So it's decidedly more subjective, probably, and more forgiving in that sense than the similar language in the other ordinance. This ordinance sort of overlaps the other ordinance, I think you can appreciate, but it would apply to any roadway. And I'd also point out that the penalty, I think as directed by council last time you saw it, you'll notice in paragraph E, is just a fine. I don't know if I'm specifically answering your question, but I recognize that this particular ordinance is subjective and addresses in a more subjective way the more objective hindering language in the center median ordinances that are kind of strict liability. So council may choose that this particular ordinance is less important, focusing on center medians that aren't ever intended for pedestrians to be in them. This ordinance is broader be curious what the chief or the judge thinks about which one would be easier, a better tool for them, I guess, to address the safety concerns that are driving in part both of these ordinances. I'm sorry for such a long answer. The ordinance itself doesn't lend itself to a right line, yes or no, on your question, but your question's the right one to sort of explore what's this about and how could it be used?
Judge, did you want to answer that before I did, or?
Nah, I have more of a generic answer. I think it's like with a lot of traffic related matters like careless driving and following too closely. There is some subjectivity to it. And so the officers have discretion to determine, take a look at the risks, the circumstances of that particular incident. I wouldn't think they'd issue a summons, somebody walking their dog in their neighborhood, but
yeah, I guess the way I would weigh in is the hindering is really what we focus on in the police department. So what does hindering really mean? Hindering means that you willfully obstruct the traffic, you slow it, you intentionally commit an act which interferes with the free flow of traffic. Walking your dog, and even if your dog strays into the line of traffic, is not an intentional act. Therefore, I would never see an officer being able to write that and make it in front of Judge Randall. So I think hindering is really where we tended to focus when we reviewed this and said, hindering is clearly the linchpin for us as to whether or not we could write this citation in different areas for different things. So you would really have to be pressed as an officer to do anything outside of somebody walking in front of a car, flagging a car down that not for help obviously, but for other reasons to try and talk to somebody or try and interfere with their driving. And I think when we think of hindering, we're also thinking of, let's use the I-70 and Kipling corridor again. We're talking about incidents that are driving our collisions over there. We've had an inordinate amount of collisions. That's our central area for traffic collisions. And that's often because people are distracted and sometimes because people are hindering their flow. In my opinion, that's an example of where hindering comes in. They tend to get into traffic or they tend to step off the curb and somebody swerves and sideswipes the car next to them. So that's sort of, I think, my interpretation of it, and that's where we focus. Jerry, if that gets to what you're asking me.
Okay,
yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the answer is helpful, that there's some subjectivity into that. My concern is just we don't have sidewalks on a lot of our main corridors. And I've seen people in wheelchairs that are unable to navigate the goat trails and, by necessity, actually will have to go into the street for a stretch. I'm not suggesting that's a good idea on Wadsworth or Kipling, but I see it quite often on 38th Avenue. And I just want to be really careful with our language about criminalizing necessary travel modes in our community for people who don't have cars. So first of all, one thing I'm really grateful in here is that we're calling them traffic crashes and not accidents. That language use is important, and I'm glad to see it here. The language, to me, this language is just really important. The whereas statements, we're frequently referring to crashes between pedestrians and vehicles, and we're really talking about crashes between drivers of vehicles and pedestrians. It's not like we have roaming vehicles. So I'd like some language cleanup that includes recognizing that we're talking about drivers, because there's some culpability there of the person behind the wheel, not just their car. And I think it's important that, I'm going to support this because I believe we need to protect the people who are misusing the medians. And I think it's stressful for the drivers in our community. But I want to be really careful that we're not calling out accountability for drivers to also be mindful of pedestrians. And so I have a proposed whereas statement asking, and I can give you the exact language, but calling out that it's incumbent on all roadway users to be vigilant and to, excuse me, I have to reread my writing here, but to be vigilant and to be accountable for safety. I think we need to be careful about pedestrians should not be walking into the street, but drivers also have a responsibility to keep their eyes open for people.
Ms. Hulting, was there a specific whereas that you're referencing? So,
Well,
or-
I'm proposing adding a whereas.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. And so I can provide specific language around that. And if it's easier after this, so we can craft it well, but I would just like, just a whereas calling accountability for all road users.
Got it.
And then the last thing that I think is important in here, a lot of times people who are loitering on the medians, or even sometimes just in where, near the on-ramps and off-ramps, they're actually impeding the traffic of other pedestrians and other non-vehicular movers. They will be in the ADA ramp, so other people who are in wheelchairs can't actually access. So I have some suggested language that I'd like to provide later that just recognizes that they're impeding the flow of other non-vehicular travelers when they're impeding the sidewalks and in medians like that. So just really quickly, should I just send that to you, Patrick, after this?
Yeah, I will probably need to get, I guess, consensus. Maybe you just need to read it once we get to the end of this. If you want to take a consensus, that would be great.
Sounds good.
And then send it to me too. That would be great.
Yep.
Did you have anything else, Ms. Hulteen, right now?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver.
I just wanted to back up what Ms. Hulteen was just speaking of, because that's been my observation. And I'm also hearing from constituents, but just having watched, bike traffic specifically under Kipling, as well as other pedestrian traffic, trying to get around people and dogs and things that aren't moving. And so so what other pedestrians that are moving through are doing is they're going around and then going into traffic to avoid whatever is there. And I do feel like we have to address that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional comments on this item? Ms. Hutchinson and then Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Thank you. This is totally a safety issue for the pedestrians that are standing on the medians. Those medians were not created for any type of pedestrian traffic or anything. They're used to separate the lanes of traffic and also for signs. So also when somebody is out there with their sign asking for money, that is distractful to the driver who is rolling down their window and giving them some money. So that is a distraction for the drivers. Okay, so they don't have any business there. And also, not all those people standing asking for money are homeless. They can make a lot of money asking for the money that way. So I see the homeless in different places, but not everybody who's in those medians are homeless. So I've talked to people who have seen people leave the medians, and then they go get it and they get picked up by a car and then they go somewhere. So it's just, I don't think it's that hard, that difficult. People have no business on those medians, and the medians are on the big traffic roads. They're not on residential roads or anything like that. So I don't know why it's so hard to figure out that this is a safety issue for either the people standing there or for the people who are driving. So this is just a new thing. This never was like that before, but it just seems like it's escalating. So that's my position. I think we do not need people standing on medians. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Ms. Nosler-Beck and then Ms. Hoppy.
Thanks, Mayor. I actually wanted to go back to the comments that Councilor Hoppy made and ask Chief Murtha a little bit about, I know that with some of our other issues, for people who have been, you know, placed under arrest. We haven't been able to take them anywhere in Jefferson County right now. And I also wonder about like the fees that we would be imposing on people that most likely don't have the money to pay those fees, and cause them to, you know, just end up in a worse off situation than they were before. Are there other options in what we can do in terms of a penalty for people, you know, being on medians? Because I think we all are in agreement that it's not safe to be there. But I just wanted to know what other options are out there.
Thank you, Counselor. So I'm probably not the best person to ask what the other, excuse me.
Can we start with the judge on that one, maybe? Judge, do you want to go? What, Judge, you want to talk about what you and I had talked about?
Yeah, thanks. I couldn't hear, that was so loud. No, the sentencing, you don't have, just because there's a fine that can be imposed doesn't mean you do impose a fine. You can fashion something other than a fine for a sentence. So it could be community service, stay off that location for a period of time, that type of thing. So whatever works for that person to impact that behavior.
Right, because I you know, do think that like Chief Murtha was talking about, that because Arvada's done this in Arvada, it's just caused a problem for us here in Wheat Ridge. And so if there's a way for us to, you know, engage and find a way for us to penalize folks and not welcome them back to our medians and safe spaces, but to also, you know, maybe connect them with Rebecca if they're in a homeless situation.
Mm-hmm.
I just think we can have the left hand talking to the right. And I would love it if that would happen.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Judge, can you describe for us what happens if, let's say you say they have to do community service and they don't do community service, or if a ticket's written and it's for a fine, but they don't pay the fine and then they don't show up for their court hearing? Can you explain kind of that process a little bit?
Sure. If you have a court date to do something other than pay money, so it could be to show proof of completion of counseling or UA or a class or whatnot, the court can issue a bench warrant. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It depends on the nature of the case, if it's high risk, low risk, if you have a criminal history on the person, history with them before with other cases, with their ability to comply with a sentence. Or you can send something called an order to show cause. It's kind of like a bench warrant light. It's a court's order. It gives you a court date and it says, oh, you missed court for this, come to court and explain why you missed court. So with non-monetary issues, you can do either one of those. With money, you cannot issue a warrant for somebody's arrest if they owe money. You have to do the order to show cause. So that's one way to handle it. Another way is and with an order to show cause, we mail it to the last known address. You could also personally serve it. And then if they don't appear, you can issue a warrant. So you can either mail it to them, and then if they fail to appear for non-payment, step 2 would be, if you have a good address, personally serve them with a court date. Most people, once it's gone that far and you finally get them into court, we work out something. Payment plan, a set date to pay in the future, conversion to community service, something else, some other significant event. I'll sometimes say, especially with homeless persons, what are you trying to do right now? Are you trying to get an ID? Are you trying to get a job? And they go, well, those are the things I'm working towards. I might modify their sentence to say, rather than paying a fine, then come back and show me that you got your ID. So it's very individualized. And again, you don't necessarily have to impose a fine. And if you do, and they don't pay it, they're not going to jail, at least immediately.
So do we find any, I mean, is there any concern about the fact that that the word is shall rather than may in these ordinances? It says shall be punished by a fine or imprisonment. So is there any, I mean, shall sounds like it must happen. May
Yeah,
sounds
it's
like it
standard
could
language.
potentially happen.
Yeah, it's standard language. I think it's in most ordinances. You know, what's inherent in it, what the custom and the usage have been is that the court fashions the sentence based on what it is the person did.
Well, and to be clear, I have never said that it's not safe. I understand it's safe. But what I'm saying is the reason why this came to us in the first place is because we were looking for a way to get the homeless out of the pedestrian areas because people were complaining about them. But this is a safety issue, but also homelessness looks different. It's not just the people that you see that don't have a home. So yeah, they might be begging and panhandling. They might be living in a car or couch surfing with people or something like that. So I think that it's, as long as we can make sure that we're not putting more hurdles in front of somebody. What if somebody's couch surfing and they're getting to a place where they've almost saved up enough money through maybe their disability checks plus what they make on the street corner begging, and then they end up with you know, now you have to go and do this community service. So like that's my concern. My concern is penalizing, is having those penalties. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Ms. Weaver.
Ms. Hoppy, I totally respect and hear what you're saying. I do want us to remember though that we are talking about the medians. We're not addressing panhandling. Panhandling is still, as we all know, allowed on certain places. And this is keeping people out of a place where I think, you know, safely wise, people shouldn't be. And I do feel strongly that, you know, why are they in the median? They're not living in the median, they're panhandling the median. And so I feel like it's, while I agree with you, it sounds to me like Judge Randall is saying that he is dealing with these things appropriately per the person that they're seeing. And I do feel that we do need to address the median, but I just want to sort of remind everybody, we're just talking about the median. We're not talking about clearing everybody out of all the street corners.
Mr. Dahl, I had a question for you. It looks like you've got your finger up, so go right ahead.
Maybe I'm anticipating your question, but the questions around sort of what the punishment is in these ordinances, I think is a fair question. And I'm glad the judge addressed the fact that we have this language, fine or imprisonment, and then in real life, in the courtroom on a given case, the judge will fashion a sentence that makes sense in that circumstance and does not feel, and I agree with him, does not feel he's limited to the fine or imprisonment necessarily. It would be fine, I think, and I'd be curious what the judge thinks, but this penalty language can certainly say a violation may be punished by a fine, imprisonment not to exceed the limits, or such alternative sentence as the municipal judge shall determine. Because that's really what he's doing anyhow. That memorializes our current and long-standing practice long before this, and I'm fine with making that change. I realize there are other more significant things around this that council wants to address, but that for me is an easy change to telegraph the range of alternatives that are available to the judge to try to make a sentence that's individualized and productive.
My question, Mr. Dahl, is that you're okay with the more permissible may instead of the more obligatory shall in the ordinances?
I am.
Okay. Thank you. Additional questions or comments? Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate this conversation because, you know, I think from the get-go, it sounded like this was punitive in a way to try to address homelessness, like Councilmember Hoppy had stated, and really it did come out of many conversations with constituents that were concerned about the safety, and you know, there was a comment on Wheat Ridge Speaks speaking to that today, and I think, you know, we can all agree that this is a safety issue. And so I understand some of the sentiments in regards to how this came to be about, and I appreciate some of the, you know, the discussion around specific language, and can definitely respect that. And I just really hope to see this move forward, because I think it benefits our community, and it allows for the police department to maybe make more contact with folks and get them the help that they need and connect them with Rebecca.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, I'd like to ask for a consensus to move forward Council Bill number 28, the ordinance adopting Section 1669 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning pedestrians hindering the flows of traffic, with the change of shall to may in letter E, and also to changing Council Bill number 27 about the pedestrian use of roadway center medians, move it on to a first reading with the change of shall versus may in item G, and also adding the language or alternative available to the judge. And I will ask that Ms. Hulteen ask for her consensus on the two whereases separately. So this is a consensus to move those forward with the language changes from shall to may, and adding in the language that our City Attorney Jerry Dahl had suggested of or alternative available to the judge.
Councilors, how do you speak on this? Do we have consensus on Ms. Hoppy's motion to change shall to may, and the other the sentencing of Mr. Dahl? Okay, we've got consensus on that. And now I'll recognize Councilwoman Hulteen.
Thank you. I'd like to ask for a consensus to add the following whereas statement to both Council Bill number 27 and 28. Whereas it is incumbent on all roadway users to be vigilant and to conduct themselves to ensure the safety of others.
Do we have consensus to add this whereas in there? We do. Thank you, councilors. Put your hands down. Mr. Dahl, have you got that language? And Ms. Hulteen?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And then I would also like to ask for consensus to, wherever practical for grammatical reasons, to replace vehicles. We're referencing collisions to vehicle operators or drivers.
All right, councilors, show of hands on that. We have consensus on that. Thank you very much. Put your hands down. And Mr. Dahl, do you have that that sort of change?
Yes, I do. From a language standpoint, we might have to say persons operating vehicles or something of that nature, because drivers don't walk around without a vehicle and hit people. Okay. I know that that's not what, but we want to make sure that when we're all done, that it makes sense. I take Councilmember Hulteen's point, and I understand how to adjust it.
Thank you. Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you. What if it's a self-driving car?
We may need to come back and change our ordinance at that time.
We may.
How about that? How about let's kick that can down the road?
Let's do.
Okay.
Okay. But a good segue to perhaps wrapping up this this item. Is there any more discussion that we need to have on this item? Okay, well, thank you very much for bringing that. That was item number 2. Before we go on to item number 3, we've been in session almost 2 hours. I'd like to take a break until about 25 minutes until 9. So we'll take about a 9-minute break, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes. We'll stand adjourned for a moment. with agenda item number 3. This is revisions to the city floodplain regulations. Mr. Goff, I see Mr. Westberg here. Do you have anything in preparation before he presents?
No, I'll turn it over to Mr. Westberg unless Ken has anything. Ken, no?
Okay, joining me tonight mostly just to answer questions, if you guys have them from more regional nature, are David Bennett's from the Mile High Flood District. He's the government relations manager there. And Stacy Thompson with the floodplain, with the Mile High Flood District, she is the floodplain manager there. So they're just here as expertise and to answer more background than I have available. I do have a PowerPoint. It's got 16 slides. I'll try to run through them pretty quickly. And we'll get this done. I'm never entirely sure if this works because I don't get to see if it's working. So if it's not working, let me know.
You're in good shape on the screen.
Okay, thank you, sir. So tonight we just want to talk mostly about two things. No camping. What we're calling no camping in the floodplain is a shorthand for that, and then also the approval of Class 2 floodplain permits related to the BOA public hearings. We also, in the process of digging into this, realize that we have some issues with our appeal and various variance regulations in our floodplain code. So we want to talk about those really too, and just get some direction from council. So the Mile High Flood District, you may have known them formerly as the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, but they've changed their name a while back, their brand, if you will. The city's a part of the district and is a member of their board of directors. Mayor Starker serves as our board representative. Thank you very much, Mayor Starker, for doing that for us. This is their new logo based on their new name. In October of 2019, which has been a little while ago, the Mile High Flood District Board adopted some regulations prohibiting tents and makeshift structures, which again, we just sort of say no camping as a shorthand version of that. And the reasons they did that, the 4 reasons they listed in their staff report to the board, was that floodplains are high-risk areas, swift water rescues endanger first responders. The materials associated with these campsites often add to the potential debris load in the stream. And the byproducts that are left behind from these campsites are often hazardous in nature. And they are high risk. In July 21st, which is just a few months before the district adopted these regulations, there was a drowning death of a 38-year-old female who was alleged to be homeless in the newspaper article. They didn't find her body until the next day, and the area that she was found in was reportedly 10 feet underwater. And one of the issues is it, by the time someone realizes someone's fallen in the water and they call rescuers, they're often gone before rescuers can get there. So there's not even a chance to save folks that are often in these high water situations. The materials that are left behind, this is a picture that the district provided me. They had this in their presentation of a box culvert somewhere within the limits of the district that shows the amount of stuff that can end up. And obviously this box culvert is not going to function the way it's intended, which potentially causes a problem upstream or even downstream, depending on the situation. This is another campsite that's underneath a bridge somewhere within the district. This is wintertime, as you can see by the snow. But again, this is going to possibly impair the ability of this bridge to convey the water that needs to get through it during a flooding event. And the byproducts, just a couple more pictures from the district. I've not been running around taking pictures of camps. But you can see there's a fair amount of debris and stuff piled up there. I don't know what's in there, but there's a high likelihood that some of that is hazardous in some form or fashion. And the same thing with this picture. This looks like an abandoned campsite. And there's just a lot of stuff left behind. It just becomes a problem for us as floodplain managers from both a debris flow standpoint and also from a life safety standpoint and the quality of our water standpoint. So the reason I want to just do a quick little brief thing on why we have floodplains. The primary purpose of a floodplain is to protect people and property from risk. We want to communicate there's risk involved in being there. And I often cite the statistic for the life of a 30-year mortgage. If you're in a 100-year floodplain, there's a 26% chance of getting flooded. Now, most of these campsites probably aren't going to be there 30 years. But if you're at the very edge of the floodplain, you're up away from the creek, you're right at the edge of it, there's still a 1% chance in any given year that there's a flood that's going to come along and take out that campsite and the people that are in it. And then if you're down in what I sort of term as the snow melt area, well, if you're in that area that generally inundates during a snow melt, there's like 100% chance you're going to get hit with the snow melt that year. But even if it's past snow melt, that part of the floodplain, there's like a 10% chance that it could be inundated by a flash flooding kind of event. And so the floodway is the part in the little graphic I've got there. The floodway is the part in the middle. That's the most dangerous part of the floodplain. It's got the highest flows, depths, and velocities. Our regulations prohibit new buildings in the floodway. And most of these campsites aren't up on the edge. They're down right by the creek often. We don't allow new buildings there. And honestly, we've got several of the places in the city where if a building gets damaged that's in the floodway, and it gets damaged to 51% of its value, then we can't let that building be rebuilt in that location. So the building would have to be torn down and they couldn't rebuild it. That's how serious the floodways are in our regulations. Even in the floodway fringe, the part outside of the floodway, buildings are supposed to be elevated a foot above the base flood elevation, which you really honestly can't do with a campsite kind of situation. They should be made of flood resistant materials, which is also difficult to do with some of these makeshift campsites. And there should be no hazardous materials. We've already sort of talked about hazardous materials that could possibly be in there. So I just wanted to open it up. That was really quick, but I just wanted to open it up for discussion and see if the council at this point had any questions, because our two topics are so sort of dissimilar in what we talk about. If the council had any discussion on adopting the same or similar regulations that the district has for prohibiting tents and makeshift structures. And I'll stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that.
Okay, and we'll open it up to questions from council on this portion of the presentation.
Oh, my stop share button's up here. So I just, again, if anyone has questions or discussion, we're just looking, and we can ask for the consensus at the end, but just looking for consensus to proceed forward. If you have questions of Mr. Bennett or Ms. Thompson from the district, they're available here too tonight.
Okay. Any questions on Mr. Westberg's presentation on camping in the floodway? And Ms. Weaver.
As opposed to parks, which, as you said, have no camping, who enforces the moving of when people are camping? Is that the police? Is that the park and rec?
So if it's in our city parks and stuff, and there might be someone else that can better answer this question, but if it's in the city parks, our parks personnel who are out there all the time are likely going to be the first ones that respond and make contact with folks. We'll hold some training with them on the stuff that's there. As you mentioned, our current regulations prohibit camping in the parks. We have several areas that are very near our open space areas that are private property that somebody could be camping in. And I don't remember how long ago it was, but there was a campsite that started on the south side of I-70 on the west side of Wadsworth. If you'll remember, it started as one tent, and before you knew it, there were 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 tents there. And it took a while to get that campsite moved on because there wasn't the sufficient posting and different things that needed to happen there. They were in very close proximity to the creek. If we'd had even a 10 or 25-year flood, it would have taken out that campsite with hopefully enough warning that we could have gotten those people out of there. But that's the real concern. And so I think outside of park areas, it becomes a thing that our code enforcement folks could respond to, or our police department folks could respond to. I see Chief Murtha still on. He might want to weigh in on that. Certainly if a private property owner calls and complains about people camping on their property and it happens to be floodplain, this is some additional regulation that allows us to hopefully move people along faster because it really is a life safety issue.
Thank you for answering that. And I don't know if Chief Murtha wants to say anything, but I just want to say that I am supportive of this. Half of my property is in the floodplain, and I have seen exactly what you said, and I can't have any buildings or animals or anything else when those waters do rise. So I think this is a really good idea. Thank you.
If I could just weigh in real quick, our community service officers are out there in the parks and as well as in the floodplain areas when we get complaints of camping, and our officers as well. They handle that. Obviously, if it's on private property and somebody complains, that's a trespass issue there. But we do engage with folks regularly in all of those areas, both the public parks and in some of our floodplains and wherever the various campsites might pop up. Just our approach might be different in different areas.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So within the specific language of tents and other makeshift structures, why is it so specific to those elements and just saying that, all objects are prohibited from this area? Why are we limiting it to those specific elements?
I don't know if Mr. Bennis wants to chime in on why the district worded things the way they did.
I'm happy. Those were just the words that we chose. We're not trying to keep people from spending the day down there. If you want to take a blanket and stuff downstairs and down to the river and spend the day, we're not trying to stop that. It's just the stuff that's being left overnight and that type of stuff. And so that was just the language that we chose. For us, it is really a public safety issue, and that's the very heart of it. We're trying to keep these people safe. We realize it's a complicated issue. There aren't good answers always, but we can't allow people that are already being challenged to sleep in unsafe conditions. So for us, it's really a public safety issue.
Thank you. Additional questions on this item? Okay, Ms. Hoppy?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to separate the consensuses, or we can hear the next piece and I can do a consensus at the end.
Well, since we're on this piece, why don't you go ahead and ask for consensus on this item?
I'd like to ask for consensus on the request from the staff with incorporating the city code to prohibit tents, makeshift structures within the floodplain.
We have consensus on that. Okay, we have consensus on that one. Thank you very much. Mr. Westberg, if you want to go over to the second item, approval of the Class 2 floodplain permits.
I will do that. And I forgot, oh, somehow I went back up a little bit. Sorry about that.
You're good on the screen.
So also, just in case I forgot to flash up my fancy graphic here. But if you are down in the floodplain areas and the sirens go off or you notice a flood coming, don't try to race down the stream. It's much quicker and faster to get out of the way if you climb to safety. So I just want to do a little PSA plug there. So our Class 2 floodplain permits are for habitable structures and dwelling units. So basically houses, duplex, or apartments that might be built in the floodplain. Our last one that we did was in 2016, and I think we've had one since that time, or before that time, in the time that I've been the floodplain manager. So we don't get a lot of these, but we do have 2 of them in the process now. And as we were, as staff was talking about these 2, we realized that maybe we've got a little bit of a disconnect. And of course, as with most things, as we looked into it, we found additional disconnects. So our current approval process is that there's a technical review that's done by the floodplain administrator. It's referred to the BOA at the Board of Adjustment after all the regulations are met. And that means that they've resolved all building codes, zoning regulations, and floodplain regulations. The project is ready to issue permits and be built. And then that's when it would be referred to the Board of Adjustment for the final approval. The Board of Adjustment, as you likely know, meets on the 4th Thursday of every month. There's a 2-week noticing and posting period required ahead of that time. And it is a public hearing. It is open to the public, and they're allowed to come and talk about things. Our concern with our current process is sort of the role that the Board of Adjustment would have in looking at these. Normally, they hear cases that involve variances from the regulations. That's their job. They're adjusting the regulations to allow something. And there's a set of criteria. They don't just blanketly allow things. There's a set of criteria they go through. But their function is really to allow projects that sort of violate the rules that we have in place. And with this particular kind of thing, when we ask them to approve a floodplain permit, we're not asking for a variance from the code. Rather, we're basically just asking for affirmation that the application meets the regulations and that they agree with the staff analysis on this. Well, there's a perception somehow, just because it's going to the Board of Adjustment, that there's been a variance granted with the approval somehow. And it's just because that's 100% of what they do. There's no federal or state requirement for approval beyond having technical staff look at it. So when I reached out to the folks at FEMA and at the state about this issue, because when I first started, I'd heard that, well, for a class 2 permit, you've got to have something beyond just staff approving it. That's not a federal state requirement. I think that was just the city did that back in the day for whatever reason. And for some reason, they chose the Board of Adjustment, the folks that set up regulations, to be the board that heard that. The other concern is there's sort of a customer service issue that we've worked with someone for several weeks and sometimes months to get to the point that their project is ready to go. And now we're going to charge them additional $150 and delay things up to a month, depending on timing, before we can issue a permit to them. And the other thing is it offers the public an opportunity to object to a project that would otherwise be approved. So we could have something that meets all the regulations from the Building, Zoning, and Floodplain Department. And because it goes before a public hearing, it gives a chance for the public to sort of weigh in on a project that they otherwise wouldn't have any say on, the issuance of a building permit on a house that's for a house that's permitted on the property they're looking to do it on. So the other thing that we wanted to talk about, as we dug into this, is we realized our appeal process in our code has some issues that we'd like to correct. So the class 1 floodplain permits, which is all the other types of projects besides the class 2, our current appeal process is if I, and I'm the floodplain administrator, by the way, if I approve or deny something, sometimes we approve things with conditions. And if the applicant doesn't like the conditions that are imposed by the approval, or they don't like the fact that we've denied the permit because it doesn't meet the code, they get to appeal to the Board of Adjustment to potentially overrule that decision. And again, there's a public hearing. The review criteria are pretty technical that are involved. And the real concern is the approval of that appeal could involve a variance, most likely if they don't like what's happening, from the regulations. And floodplain variances are a huge deal on the state and the federal level. They require, there's a whole separate process you go through with both the state and FEMA that should take place before the hearing, but our regulations don't require that. What we typically do is we prepare a memo based on the criteria and the regulations. And our criteria does loosely match what the state and federal criteria has, so that's a good thing. But then the board gets to decide on that variance if someone just comes and asks for a variance. And our code allows that, because you sort of have to allow that. The problem is that our code says we refer the variance to federal agencies only if we're asked by that agency after the variance has been granted, which is a clear violation of the state and federal regulations on how variances should be treated. The concerns with this are floodplain variances are a big deal. If we're allowing somebody to vary from the code, that means we're putting their life or their property at risk. And it violates the federal and state regulations that require referral before the variance is granted. And that process that you go through, that federal and state process, is very lengthy and arduous, and it's completely bypassed by the way our code currently reads. And it's arduous for a reason, because again, we're putting life and property at risk. And if we were to grant one variance, depending on what the variance was, to our floodplain regulations, somebody that puts our entire community rating system, the CRS program, at risk. And as a reminder, our CS program right now is a class 5 and gives most of our residents in the floodplain a 25% discount on their flood insurance. So variances, I can't emphasize enough, variances are a big deal in the floodplain world. We shouldn't allow them. And so again, just wanted to sort of see if the council wanted to talk about this particular topic. And I will stop sharing again and see if there's any questions or concerns about this particular topic.
Thank you again. So we're talking about the variance and and who adjusts where these hearings go. So
yes.
Questions from council. I have one just for a start, Mr. Westbrook. What's the difference between a class 1 and a class 2 floodplain permit?
So the way our code defines, and the class 1 is everything but a habitable structure, and the class 2 is the habitable structure. So the class 1s are things like fences and sheds. You know, they want to do some grading on their property, just all the nuanced things. Even an addition on an existing house is a class 1 permit unless that addition creates a new dwelling unit, and then it becomes a class 2 unit.
Okay, thank you. And I know that we've been working hard to get residences out of the floodplain. Or the two that you're looking at, building residences in the floodplain?
So they're down the Sloan's Lake, which is a new floodplain for us as a city. And so, you know, we've looked at where they're at. They're on the edge. We think they can definitely design those two properties to have those two houses built very safely. We're not allowing basements. They've got to raise them 1 foot above the base flood elevation, you know, following all the rules that we've got. And they can do them in a way that also doesn't impact their neighbors and create a problem with the floodwaters being diverted somewhere else. So these are two projects that we would likely approve. They've just submitted the permits. We've just started looking at them and going through that process. But because we missed the cutoff for the May BOA meeting, they'd be looking at the June meeting, and there's a chance we could have everything ready to approve in a couple of weeks if they've done their jobs right. But either way, if we miss that cutoff for that meeting, we bounce out that approval for another month or so, depending on where we hit on things. So that's what sort of brought this up and sort of precipitated us looking at all of this, that, you know, maybe the BOA is not the best group to be looking at this. We really ought to just keep it to the technical folks to look at these permits like we do building codes.
And these two properties that you're looking at would not affect our community rating system?
No, absolutely not, because they're in the floodplain. They can be designed. We wouldn't allow any variances from the flood regs and those kind of things. So we do think these can be done safely, just like the house that was done in 2016 was built. They put their finished floor 3 feet above the flood elevation. So they really went above and beyond to try to make sure that they met the regs and planned for the future really well. So we'll work with these, and they're on the, there's a single house now on 2 lots. They're going to tear the existing house down and build 2 new houses on each separate lot is the deal. So that's why there's 2 instead of just like the one random one we get every 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions? Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mark, for your presentation. This time I'd like to ask for a consensus to remove the Board of Adjustment from their role in the review of Class 2 permits and appeals related to floodplain permits, and to authorize staff to move forward in correcting the city's floodplain variance procedures to be in compliance with the state process.
Do we have consensus on that motion? We do. Thank you very much. You know, put your hands down. Mr. Westberg, are there any other direction that you need on this item?
No, just from the standpoint of trying to be as accommodating as we can be to the 2 permits that are just starting. We're going to try to, we're not rushing it through, but we're trying to move it quickly through the process, the ordinance. So we hope to be back. We hope to go to Planning Commission on June 17th. And then come back to you for first reading on June 28th, and then get second reading on July 12th. Hoping to try to get this done in the same time frame that we're reviewing these 2 permits.
Well, that'll give us something to do this summer.
You'll have a lot to do on July 12th with me, actually.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for bringing that forward, Mr. Westberg. Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett and Ms. Thompson, for joining us tonight. We appreciate you being here, and always the good work that you do with the Mile High Flood District. So thanks so much. And that will conclude agenda item number 3. And I'll go back to my agenda. Number 4 would be our staff reports. Mr. Goff.
That is it from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to elected officials reports. Please raise your hand and provide us a report, Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to announce that the Chamber of Commerce and the City of Wheat Ridge is hosting a cleanup on Saturday, May 22nd from 9 to 11. We're going to meet at the law offices of Thomas Hagelson, which is the building right in front of Denny's on the northeast corner. And we'll probably clean up in that area, those businesses, and then finish at the Village Inn.
Okay, Saturday, 9 to 11. Thank you very much. Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to state that this Friday is Wheat Ridge High School's senior graduation, and congratulations to all the seniors. And my third grandchild is graduating on Friday. So way to go, Corinne and everybody.
All right, round of applause for the graduating class of 2021. Okay. Additional elected officials reports. Okay, no topping that one tonight. So thank you very much for a great meeting tonight. I appreciate Kelly Barker and Rebecca Rudabaugh for being here on our homeless discussion. And Mr. Bennett and Ms. Thompson from the Mile High Flood District. Thanks all of the counselors for being here. We will be back in our regular meeting 1 week from tonight on May the 24th at 7 o'clock. So until then, our meeting is adjourned. Good night.